We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. A serious problem in our society is the erosion of the value of an individual. People become anonymous faces in a crowd, statistics for a census, or names in a computerized mailing list. They are often valued only as customers, suppliers, workers, church members, or taxpayers. But worse than that, some people are seen as hindrances and liabilities in our efficient and neatly ordered way of life. The mentally disabled child, the physically handicapped, the poor, and the helpless elderly, too often suffer from being ostracized, neglected, or worse. It's time for Christians to remind themselves of the value of individuals. Jesus moved among the crowds, but he saw them as individuals. They were not objects to be used, but persons loved and redeemed. Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan reveals his values. Through the sad incident by the roadside and the compassionate act of the ethnic outcast, Jesus answered a crucial question: who is my neighbor? Our first verse says, on one occasion an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Many times the teachers of the law questioned Jesus in order to test, trap and discredit him. Once somebody asked, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" The person was an expert in the law and should have known the answer to such a basic question. The fact that he used the words "what shall I do" indicates that the expert assumed that some work was required in order to gain life. However, the lawyer wasn't looking for information. He was looking for a chance to turn Jesus' answer against him. Verse 26 says, "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" Jesus didn't answer directly but turned the question back to the lawyer. He asked the legal expert what is written in the law. By referring back to the law, Jesus was showing his respect for what this man had dedicated his life. Jesus then asked, "How do you understand it?" Jesus knew that the man already had an answer to his own question, so he allowed him to express it. Verse 27 says, "He answered, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." The lawyer immediately answered Jesus by quoting Deuteronomy 6:5. This was part of the Shema, which every devout Jew knew and recited every day. It is a command directing a person's entire being toward God, including the inner person, emotions, and physical strength. But the lawyer went one step further and included one's intellect also to be directed toward God. The lawyer also combined this quotation from Deuteronomy 6:5 with one from Leviticus 19:18, which demands that a person's love for his neighbor should be equal to his love for self. In verse 28, Jesus said to the lawyer, "You have answered correctly." Jesus replied, "Do this and you will live." Jesus' comment probably surprised the lawyer for at least two reasons. First, Jesus agreed with him. There was no reason for an intellectual debate between them. Second, Jesus applied the lawyer's answer to him personally when he said, "Keep doing it." The lawyer may have assumed that knowing the right answer would guarantee eternal life, but constant obedience is needed. Verse 29 says, "But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?'" The lawyer was not ready to accept Jesus' simple answer. So he asked another question to justify himself. He knew that he didn't really love all people, only those he considered to be his neighbors. Being a Jewish leader, he looked for a loophole, asking Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" If he could get Jesus to admit that certain persons were not his neighbors, he could save his conscience regarding his lack of love. Verse 30 says, in reply Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him and went away, leaving him half dead." To answer the lawyer's question, Jesus told a parable. The story is about a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, a trip that went downward and covered about 17 miles. The road down from Jerusalem to Jericho was winding and rocky and was an ideal place for robbers and murderers. Jesus' listener could easily have imagined the situation of the man in the story. He said that this man, probably a Jew, was attacked by thieves who stripped him of everything he had, including his clothing. They beat him and left him to die by the road. Verse 31 goes on to say a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Jesus said by coincidence a priest came by while the man was lying there wounded. Since Jericho was the home of many priests, it's likely that this priest was returning home after serving at the temple in Jerusalem. Jesus said that when the priest saw the wounded man, he avoided him by crossing over to the other side of the road. Of course, we can speculate that the priest thought the wounded man was close to death or already dead, and he didn't want to ceremoniously defile himself by touching a dead body. In verse 32 Jesus said, "So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side." The Levite, like the priest, might have been expected to show compassion since he assists the priests in the temple. He did show some curiosity, for he went to where the man was, and looked at him. But even the Levite crossed the road and passed by on the other side. In verse 33, Jesus continued to say, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him." The next person to see the injured man was not a Jewish leader or layman but a Samaritan. Jesus could not have chosen a more distasteful illustration for a Jewish leader. Jews hated Samaritans. They were considered half-breeds and semi-pagan because they had their own religion as a rival to Judaism. True Jews despised the Samaritans and avoided them and their country. To be fair, Samaritans generally hated Jews as well. But when the Samaritan saw the injured man, he had compassion on him. He didn't try to see first what his nationality was or ask whether this Jew would have helped him. His compassion carried him beyond such pettiness. Verse 34 says, "He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him." The Samaritan showed his compassion in practical ways. First he bandaged the injured man's wounds, while pouring wine and oil on them. Wine was used as an antiseptic to cleanse wounds, and the olive oil was used to ease the pain. Since the injured man couldn't walk, the Samaritan also put him on his own donkey, while he walked on the rocky road so the injured man could ride. Then the Samaritan brought him to an inn, and personally cared for him overnight. Verse 35 says, "The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.'" The Samaritan's care for the injured man was not finished yet. When the Samaritan was leaving the inn, he left money with the innkeeper for the patient's further care. He gave the innkeeper 2 denarii, silver coins equal to 1 day's wages for a common worker. 2 denarii would be enough to care for the injured man for several days. The Samaritan went on his way, but not before he assured the innkeeper that when he returned, he would repay any extra costs that the host incurred. Here is a remarkable picture of selfless love shown by a total stranger. Jesus illustrated what loving one's neighbor as oneself really means. Remember, this parable does not answer the question, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" It answers the question, "Who is my neighbor?" Verse 36 says, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" Based on the story he had just told, Jesus asked the lawyer, which now of these 3, was neighbor to the victim of the thieves. Jesus subtly changed the whole nature of the discussion. He often did this to move from an original question to one of higher importance. The lawyer had earlier asked, "Who is my neighbor?" which was another way of asking, "Who must I love?" The true neighbor does not ask who to love because the love of God in him flows naturally to everyone. Our final verse says, "The expert in the law replied, 'The one who had mercy on him.' Jesus told him, 'Go and do likewise.'" The lawyer was forced to come to the unpleasant conclusion that the Samaritan, instead of the priest and the Levite, had been a neighbor to the injured man. He could have said the Samaritan, but he chose not to mention the despised name Samaritan. He simply answered the one who had mercy on him. This accurately expressed the point Jesus was emphasizing, namely that the true neighbor shows mercy. Showing mercy is more than saying to someone who's hurting, "I empathize with you." It involves getting involved to provide help. Like love, mercy is a word of action. The priest and the Levite, who outwardly maintained the requirements of the law, proved by their lack of action that they did not understand the essence of obeying the law. Jesus left the lawyer with a command, "Go, and do likewise." The Christian is a neighbor to everybody, and Christians serve God through service to all people. Religious ritual is meaningless apart from a loving, giving heart. Let's ask the Lord to help us see our neighbors as He does, and be willing to inconvenience ourselves to serve them. In that way, we demonstrate the degree of our love for God. Jesus' words still echo in the world today, "Go, and do likewise." Our lesson next week is entitled, Love Divine. Our biblical reference is 1 Corinthians 13. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ, and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.